The first signal came through the lunar deep array at 0314 UTC, a burst of ordered mathematics that shattered the long quiet between stars. Beneath the sea of tranquility, in the cold steel of the operations deck, Commander Alice Wren stood over the data stream as it unfolded across her visor. The pulse was too perfect to be natural. Structured frequencies, harmonic intervals, patterns nested within patterns. A mind had made this. Within minutes, triangulation nodes from Neptune to Titan confirmed the origin. 33 objects equidistant, accelerating sunward at impossible precision. Their formation geometry was flawless, their vector deliberate. Nothing in the archives matched the profile. What came through the sensors wasn't an exploration fleet, it was a war procession. By dawn, every major defense node on Earth had received the broadcast. Across continents and orbitals, analysts and generals watched the same pattern repeat. An energy field of staggering power approaching the inner system. Humanity had waited centuries for proof of life beyond its cradle. It arrived not as curiosity but as intent. The Galactic had declared war. On the moon, the temperature in the command center dropped despite the recycled air. Alice Wren's gaze stayed fixed on the viewport. Beyond it, the stars looked indifferent, their distant calm mocking the storm that now gathered at the edge of the solar system. She had trained her entire life for a war that most thought would never come. And as the data scrolled across the displays, she understood that the waiting was over. Beneath the Rockies, in a fortress of reinforced granite, General Hector Vale examined the incoming telemetry. Years of campaigns on Earth's borders had carved his features into hard lines, and yet even he felt the unfamiliar weight of this scale. The alien fleet's mass was equivalent to a small moon, but its heat signature was null. Its surface emitted no recognizable emissions, as if wrapped in a field that absorbed the universe itself. At the scientific complex adjoining command, Dr. Ishira Quell parsed the signal through probability matrices. Each new data pass stripped away coincidence. The fleet had been moving long before detection, its course premeditated. To her trained eyes, the pattern was not just travel, it was doctrine. The enemy had studied humanity for years, maybe centuries, and now advanced with the precision of those who already knew their target's weaknesses. On the upper floors of the same complex, Ambassador Lena Moravec reviewed the encoded transmission. The harmonics resolved into geometry, a spiral collapsing inward to a singular blade. It was communication without words, mathematics as menace. The image suggested intent so universal that even without translation, the meaning was absolute. Humanity had been given no terms, no warning, only inevitability. In the days that followed, fear and unity spread in equal measure. The orbital networks reoriented into defensive posture. Energy grids linked continents. Spaceborne reactors that had powered peaceful mining operations were redirected into weapons production. Every factory capable of forging a rail coil or fusion core became part of the Crucible network. A planetary web now turned toward survival. The alien fleet crossed Neptune's orbit in formation so precise, it defied chaos theory. Observers noted that each ship's displacement bent surrounding starlight, refracting reality around them. They radiated no thermal signature, no visible thrusters, and yet moved with coherent acceleration. To watch them advance was to witness the end of everything known about propulsion and war. In orbit above Earth, the first human countermeasure took shape. The 7th Orbital Wing, under Captain Elias Ward, prepared to engage. His ship, the Argent Vector, was a product of desperation. Compact, overpowered, its frame stretched to the edge of what human engineering could endure. Its systems thrummed with barely contained heat, its weapons calibrated for a fight no one fully understood. Ward's squadron deployed into the shadow of the atmosphere, masked by auroral interference. 6 vessels drifted outward, their engines whispering blue ion trails that vanished against the void. Each pilot knew their orders were little more than conjecture. Intercept, observe, and if the enemy proved hostile, strike to learn. They met the vanguard 12 hours later beyond Saturn's orbit. What awaited them resembled an obsidian cathedral adrift in nothing. The alien ship's hull shimmered with fractal apertures that devoured light, turning reflection itself into absence. Every human sensor that touched it returned corrupted data. When the fleet initiated scan lock, the alien vessel reacted faster than any system could track. A burst of pure energy expanded outward, erasing the squadron's forward drones in a single luminous breath. The electromagnetic backlash blinded instruments and fried half the Argent Vector's targeting suite. For a few stunned seconds, Ward's systems rebooted through static, the ship groaning under the surge. Analysis of the attack revealed a defense mechanism that operated without perceptible lag. It was not reaction, it was preemption. The alien systems anticipated strikes before they occurred. They didn't defend. They denied the concept of attack. Ward adjusted his vessel's targeting algorithms, aligning his remaining payload to probe the enemy field. He fired the first rail slug manually, a kinetic dart moving faster than sound could exist, a piece of metal wrapped in intention. It vanished on contact, dissolving into dust before impact. Subsequent rounds were staggered by milliseconds. The second disintegrated. The third flared. For an instant, a patch of alien hull lost coherence. Sensors screamed under a flood of distorted readings. Within that flicker, humanity glimpsed an opening. The alien defense cycled on a measurable rhythm, a phase shift renewing every thousandth of a second. Ward transmitted the data, compressing it through a dark line relay masked as lunar background noise. His ship had seconds left. The alien construct responded, releasing a swarm of metallic fragments that moved with hive-like precision. One by one, his wing disappeared into expanding clouds of vapor. The argent vector became the last spark in the void, a single heat bloom defying the silence. The transmission completed before his reactor collapsed. The light from the explosion took 45 minutes to reach Earth, and by then the data had already saved humanity. In the Lunar Operations Core, Alice Wren decoded the signal. The discovery was not victory but understanding. The alien armor flickered between states of matter and absence, vulnerable only during transition. For the first time since the war began, there was something that could be hit. The information spread across the global command networks. General Vale authorized immediate reconfiguration of all orbital rail systems. Sharaquel devised a predictive firing model based on synchronized temporal offsets, an algorithm that transformed timing into weaponry. Instead of reacting to enemy movement, Earth would predict the oscillation and strike in the moment between invisibility and invincibility. Factories doubled their output. Every coil gun from the African tether arrays to the Arctic platforms was recalibrated to fire, not when told, but when calculated. Humanity was preparing to strike blindfolded against a god that bled only in rhythm. 5 days after the first contact, the operation began. They named it Hammervale. From Mars's orbit outward, 300 kinetic projectiles launched in perfect coordination. Each slug traveled on a trajectory that accounted for signal delay, gravitational lensing, and the precise cycle of the alien phase field. For the first time in history, humanity fired into the future, predicting where the enemy would be before the enemy existed in that state. 40 minutes later, telescopes caught the first bloom of impact. A single alien cruiser destabilized, its geometry collapsing into molten debris. Another drifted off vector, crippled. The rest adapted instantly, shifting formation to compensate for losses. Humanity had drawn first blood and the universe had noticed. The celebration lasted less than a breath. A new pulse erupted from the alien fleet, a wave saturating every frequency band, drowning all communications in white noise. Within minutes, the outer colonies went dark. Predictive systems faltered. The very algorithms that had made Hammervale possible began to fail, as the enemy altered the structure of space around the data pathways. The alien fleet accelerated, closing distance to inner orbit in half the predicted time. Humanity's defenses scrambled. Alice Wren, now coordinating from the lunar surface, rerouted control protocols through hardened local networks. Without global synchronization, every orbital defense system would need to operate autonomously. The margin for error narrowed to microseconds. On Earth, Vale prepared for the worst-case scenario. The fleet's trajectory bypassed outer defenses and headed directly for the planet. The gravitational distortions they created triggered tidal anomalies across the Pacific and atmospheric surges across Europe. Humanity's shielded bunkers trembled as if the sky itself had turned hostile. In the lunar trenches, alien drones landed for the first time. Metallic shapes sliced through regolith and began tunneling toward the buried bases. Their precision was inhuman, their coordination flawless. Automated turrets fired on thermal locks, turning the gray horizon into a flickering storm of light and dust. The battle on the moon was silent and brutal. The vacuum carried no sound. Only the tremors felt through steel floors as distant impacts shook the tunnels. Alice watched the sensor feeds collapse one by one as the alien drones adapted to each defense pattern. She rerouted every surviving weapon to visual targeting, abandoning the corrupted guidance systems. Solar reflectors that once powered the lunar colonies were redirected toward the surface, focusing beams intense enough to blind the optical sensors of the invaders. The enemy advance faltered beneath a glare brighter than dawn. For the first time, the drones moved erratically, retreating under the flood of reflected sunlight. Yet victory remained temporary. Reports from deep space sensors revealed the main alien fleet adjusting its descent vectors. The massive structures shifted from formation to assault pattern, descending through the atmosphere's upper edge like descending gods. The first of them crossed low orbit above the Pacific. Its shadow swallowed the horizon and the seas rose in defiance. Gravitational shear ripped apart satellites and orbital debris. Across the planet, power grids surged and failed as electromagnetic interference rolled over them like thunder without sound. In the heart of the chaos, humanity's resolve hardened. Soldiers prepared for ground combat against enemies no one had seen clearly. Engineers repurposed everything: construction drones, mining lasers, freight ships into weapons. Scientists fed algorithms with fragments of data from Ward's last transmission, refining strike models between every heartbeat. At every command post, every hidden shelter, and every orbital trench, one truth began to settle. The enemy was older, faster, and infinitely more advanced, but humanity had something it could not simulate. Desperation bred invention. In the command center on the moon, Alice Wren watched the first alien atmospheric entry tear the sky apart. Her expression didn't change. Around her, crews worked with the precision of those who no longer expected to survive but refused to yield. She knew that the message had already reached every soldier and pilot across the system. The Galactic had declared war. Earth was finally answering. At the edge of the solar night, in some distant data core aboard the alien flagship, an artificial intelligence adjusted its assessment parameters. The human species, previously categorized as primitive, was reclassified as adaptive aggressor. On the lunar horizon, under a sky filled with burning trajectories, humanity made its stand. The void no longer seemed silent. It was alive with the hum of defiance. And as the first hours after atmospheric breach reshaped the definition of survival, the alien ships entered the thermosphere as if gravity were an afterthought. Their dark hulls wrapped in sheaths of plasma that folded the laws of aerodynamics. From orbit, their descent looked almost graceful, a rain of black fire cutting through blue sky. Beneath them, continents flickered with defense grid activations, power surges, and the light of cities darkening under emergency lockdowns. The impact signatures registered across every hemisphere within minutes. Each alien vessel halted miles above ground, suspended on invisible force fields that distorted the air itself. Around their silhouettes, storm systems formed spontaneously, drawn by the energy gradients spilling from their presence. Humanity's weapons turned toward them in unison: railguns, missile clusters, orbital slugs, beam arrays. For a single breath of global synchronization, the Earth struck back. The counterfire burned the skies. From high atmosphere to ocean trenches, human technology screamed its defiance. Projectiles tore through the clouds, piercing the shimmering halos that surrounded the descending enemy ships. For moments, the alien forms glowed under the bombardment, their hulls rippling with impact signatures. But the explosions dispersed across invisible membranes, waves of energy absorbing and bending the force away. One vessel over the Atlantic faltered briefly, its gravitational sheath fluctuating. A city-sized fragment broke from its hull and plummeted into the ocean, detonating with the force of tectonic fury. The resulting tidal wave erased coastlines in seconds. Humanity witnessed the scale of the confrontation it had invited, the realization that even victory could kill millions. In the Lunar Command Corps, Alice Wren coordinated what remained of orbital synchronization. Each satellite that survived the first alien pulse was repurposed into a kinetic dart. She directed strikes not at the massive ships themselves, but at the relay drones that orbited around them. These smaller constructs acted as the fleet's sensory nodes, their geometry reminiscent of crystalline eyes suspended in formation. Destroying them was the only way to blind the giants. Hundreds of human craft launched suicide trajectories toward those orbiting sentinels. One by one, they vanished into fields of distortion. Yet with every loss came data. Each destroyed drone added fragments of telemetry, enough for Dr. Isharaquel's models to refine the next strike. Humanity was learning at the pace of its own extinction. General Vale monitored the planet's defense status from the buried fortress beneath Colorado granite. Entire regions had gone silent. The jamming fields extended through the ionosphere, rendering communication a matter of physical couriers and optical bursts. Command was no longer centralized. The war had fractured into thousands of local theaters, each adapting in isolation. Ambassador Moravec oversaw what remained of the Solar Treaty Council. Political unity dissolved in the noise, replaced by a single binding instinct, the will to keep fighting. Nations ceased to exist as separate entities. Supply chains formed across shattered borders, moving fuel, ordnance, and medical resources through chaos. Human resilience began to resemble its own kind of weapon. On the moon, the airlocks trembled from kinetic resonance. Alice Reen's crews fought under artificial gravity set to minimal to conserve power. Reactor heat bled through the corridors, turning the walls slick with condensation. Every calculation carried a human cost. Hours traded for lives, seconds for cities. She watched the telemetry screens track casualty estimates climbing faster than production could compensate. The Crucible network, Earth's emergency manufacturing grid, reached critical strain. Power converters overheated in the Arctic stations. Automated forges on Mars ceased transmission. The network that had made Hammervale possible was collapsing under its own brilliance. Yet humanity continued to improvise. Civilian vessels were rearmed as kinetic platforms. Cargo carriers were fitted with electromagnetic shields stripped from broken satellites. Farmers converted seed drones into reconnaissance units. The line between military and civilian no longer existed. Ishara Quell worked without rest in the subterranean analytical chambers of Geneva. The jamming interference had reduced sensor fidelity to near zero, forcing her team to rely on predictive simulations detached from live data. The models became abstractions, mathematical ghosts of a war they could no longer see. Each recalibration carried the risk of miscalculation that could waste what few weapons remained. She understood that the science she had loved had become a form of warfare measured in probabilities of survival rather than truth. The alien ships began deploying ground units within 20 hours of arrival. They descended as clouds of black nanite aggregates that reconstituted into articulated constructs upon reaching the surface. These forms moved with fluid precision, neither mechanical nor biological, shaped for efficiency alone. Energy beams sliced through armor and stone as if cutting air. Human infantry faced them in trenches carved from melted earth. Exosuits and powered frames provided limited protection, their shielding burning out after seconds of exposure. Soldiers fought behind walls of smoke and electromagnetic static, hiding movement through sensory deception. Every battlefield became a laboratory of improvisation. In the ruins of Buenos Aires, a platoon discovered that conventional explosives detonated prematurely within alien distortion fields. They repurposed chemical propellants into thermal weapons, igniting air density itself to disrupt enemy cohesion. The tactic spread virally through encrypted bursts, evolving into localized firestorms that temporarily blinded alien sensors. Survival became an art of invention. Beneath the seas, submarines hunted in silence. The aliens avoided deep water, their gravitic systems unstable under pressure gradients. Humanity exploited the oversight. Hidden shipyards in the Mariana Trench and Arctic Basin began producing stealth vessels coated with reflective polymer derived from asteroid dust. These submarines launched missiles through ocean vents, using the heat plumes to mask trajectories. For the first time since the war began, humanity controlled an element the enemy did not understand. Still, the losses multiplied. Whole regions vanished beneath orbital bombardments that erased geography. Forests became glass, cities turned to powder. Yet amid ruin, networks of survivors continued transmitting. Fragments of data leapt across darkened continents, carrying the seeds of adaptation. Humanity had become a distributed intelligence, chaotic, fragmented but alive. Alice Reen studied the cumulative patterns forming across the command lattice. Through the noise, she saw a rhythm emerging. The aliens were not omniscient. Their operations relied on synchronization between capital ships and ground relays. When those relays failed, the enemy's response time faltered. It was a weakness measured in seconds, but seconds had become the universe's most precious currency. She issued new targeting algorithms through lunar transmission bursts. Each independent defense cell was instructed to aim not at the invincible warships, but at the coordination beacons embedded within their atmospheric shadows. These beacons pulsed invisible energy fields to align gravitational distortions. Destroying even one created temporary disarray among nearby units. The first coordinated strike came from the Pacific Theater. Submerged vessels launched payloads guided by seismic resonance, homing on gravitational irregularities instead of radio coordinates. One by one, the beacons collapsed in cascading distortions. For several minutes, the alien fleet above lost formation. In that fleeting window, railguns hidden beneath the Andes and kinetic towers across Asia fired in unison. The combined impact shattered a portion of the enemy's orbital envelope. For the first time since the invasion, alien structures burned in Earth's atmosphere not as weapons but as wreckage. The debris fell like black rain, seeding the stratosphere with glowing fragments that streaked across the night. The victory carried its own shadow. Debris from the fallen alien vessels radiated energy beyond containment. Clouds of particulate matter contaminated the upper air, generating storms of electromagnetic fury. Planes dropped from the sky. Satellites short-circuited. Every victory came with new damage that rewrote the planet's physics. Dr. Quell's analysis confirmed a grim hypothesis. The enemy's technology destabilized the natural magnetic equilibrium. If too many ships were destroyed near the planet, Earth's magnetic field could collapse entirely. Humanity was fighting on a clock that would erase its home even in triumph. The moral burden deepened. Commanders began choosing which cities to sacrifice to preserve planetary stability. Entire regions became strategic voids, abandoned to preserve the balance of the biosphere. For Alice Wren, the calculus became unbearable. Each coordinate she selected for evacuation carried millions of lives into uncertainty. Yet the alternative was extinction. General Vale oversaw these decisions with silent resolve. His authority extended across what was left of global command, a fractured web of field officers, AI networks, and automated logistics. His every order was transmitted through hardened couriers, unmanned capsules launched from underground rail cannons that surfaced through magnetic guidance. Communication had returned to the age of physical travel. Ambassador Moravec continued her work in the last remnants of the diplomatic corps. She coordinated humanitarian corridors between surviving populations and underground sanctuaries. Beneath the ruins of Paris, she organized an information hub where refugees recorded testimonies and tactical observations. Their memories became fragments of intelligence, turning trauma into data. The war had made everyone a witness and a soldier. In orbit, the moon trembled under renewed bombardment. The alien fleet had identified the command infrastructure hidden beneath its surface. Impact waves shattered tunnels, collapsing entire sectors. Alice Wren refused evacuation. The base became both target and transmitter. Its remaining reactors rerouted to amplify outbound signals for planetary coordination. She watched the power readings fall as sections burned away. Each tremor through the floor plates was another kilometer of lunar structure erased, yet the data continued to flow. From every dying sensor, from every failing relay, humanity extracted new information. The pattern became clear. The aliens were not a single consciousness but a network of autonomous war constructs. Their coordination depended on a central hub positioned outside the planetary orbit, an enormous command lattice anchored between Mars and Jupiter. Destroying it would sever their control, but reaching it required a fleet that no longer existed. Vale assembled what remained of the orbital divisions. The surviving fragments of the Hammervale platforms, the crippled carriers from Mars, and the stealth submarines of Earth's oceans were recalibrated for a single offensive. The plan was simple in structure, but nearly impossible in execution. Reach the alien command lattice, disable its synchronization core, and force the entire fleet into disarray. Humanity's survival depended on a gamble beyond logistics, a leap of determination masquerading as strategy. Dr. Quell refined the attack models, mapping a trajectory that exploited gravitational slingshots and debris fields left from earlier battles. The ships would travel in near darkness, powered down between burns to avoid detection. Every watt of energy saved meant another kilometer gained. The voyage would take them through regions of space littered with wreckage and interference, an environment hostile to both human physiology and machine function. Alice Wren volunteered to coordinate the mission from lunar orbit, refusing transfer to Earth. The base was failing, but its position allowed direct line-of-sight communication with the departing fleet. As long as she remained operational, She could guide them through the storm of debris and interference. On the surface, the last defenders of the moon continued to hold as alien drones descended in waves. The gray dust turned black under the fire of bombardment. Craters merged into canyons, airlocks fused shut from heat. The command base was half collapsed when the fleet began its launch sequence. Through layers of static and radiation, Alice monitored the telemetry. Each vessel that cleared the atmosphere added another heartbeat to the planet's fading pulse. Humanity was sending its last strength into the dark, a whisper of resistance against a universe that had already declared the outcome. The departure burned across the sky in silence, visible from the shattered cities below as trails of fire crossing the night. Survivors watched and knew that what left Earth might never return, but their ascent carried something greater than survival. It carried defiance. In the command chamber, as the moon shook under the weight of incoming fire, Alice Wren adjusted the final trajectory vectors. Her hands moved with calm precision, aligning humanity's last hope toward the heart of the enemy network. Around her, consoles died one by one, lights fading into red embers. The final transmission encoded her coordinates, her signature, and the directive that defined the war's next phase. The alien fleet closed around the moon. The bombardment turned its surface into liquid glass. Deep beneath, Alice watched the signal confirmation from the departing fleet flicker to green before the sensors failed. The transmission was away. Humanity's counterstrike had begun. As the last reactor overloaded, the lunar crust fractured outward in a burst of light that rivaled sunrise. The command center ceased to exist, but its signal raced through the void, carrying the coordinates of vengeance. In the darkness beyond Mars, the surviving ships adjusted their vectors, engines igniting like small defiant stars. Humanity's fleet vanished into the black between worlds, chasing the origin of their extinction. Behind them, the Earth burned and endured. Ahead, the war reached its next frontier. The galaxy had declared war. And now humanity's grin was no longer defiance. It was resolve sharpened into inevitability. First alien cruiser breached the atmosphere. The world below rose to meet it. The fleet moved without light. In the silence between Mars and Jupiter, the remnants of humanity's armada drifted like ghosts through a graveyard of debris. Every hull bore scars from earlier battles, pitted metal, scorched armor, makeshift repairs welded by robotic arms that trembled from radiation exposure. The ships were not designed for this kind of endurance, yet they persisted through necessity rather than engineering. Each vessel traveled on pre-programmed burns to minimize detection. Engines ignited for seconds, then fell silent for hours while momentum carried them forward. Heat was the new enemy. Radiators were stowed to reduce thermal signature, forcing interiors into near-freezing temperatures. Crews worked in breath mist and shivering silence, guided by the faint pulse of bioluminescent instruments that barely pierced the darkness. Aboard the command carrier Solace Vector, General Hector Vale monitored the drifting formation. The fleet had dwindled to less than 100 ships. Warships, cargo refits, and autonomous drones pressed into service as scouts. Their collective firepower was a fraction of what Earth once commanded. Yet within these battered hulls burned the last organized resistance of the human species. Vale understood that survival was no longer a metric. On Earth, Vale prepared for the worst-case scenario. The fleet's trajectory bypassed outer defenses and headed directly for the planet. The gravitational distortions they created triggered tidal anomalies across the Pacific and atmospheric surges across Europe. Humanity's shielded bunkers trembled as if the sky itself had turned hostile. In the lunar trenches, alien drones landed for the first time. Metallic shapes sliced through regolith and began tunneling toward the buried bases. Their precision was inhuman, their coordination flawless. Automated turrets fired on thermal locks, turning the gray horizon into a flickering storm of light and dust. The battle on the moon was silent and brutal. The vacuum carried no sound. Only the tremors felt through steel floors as distant impacts shook the tunnels. Alice watched the sensor feeds collapse one by one as the alien drones adapted to each defense pattern. She rerouted every surviving weapon to visual targeting, abandoning the corrupted guidance systems. Solar reflectors that once powered the lunar colonies were redirected toward the surface, focusing beams intense enough to blind the optical sensors of the invaders. The enemy advance faltered beneath a glare brighter than dawn. For the first time, the drones moved erratically, retreating under the flood of reflected sunlight. Yet victory remained temporary. Reports from deep space sensors revealed the main alien fleet adjusting its descent vectors. The massive structures shifted from formation to assault pattern, descending through the atmosphere's upper edge like descending gods. The first of them crossed low orbit above the Pacific. Its shadow swallowed the horizon and the seas rose in defiance. Gravitational shear ripped apart satellites and orbital debris. Across the planet, power grids surged and failed as electromagnetic interference rolled over them like thunder without sound. In the heart of the chaos, humanity's resolve hardened. Soldiers prepared for ground combat against enemies no one had seen clearly. Engineers repurposed everything: construction drones, mining lasers, freight ships into weapons. Scientists fed algorithms with fragments of data from Ward's last transmission, refining strike models between every heartbeat. At every command post, every hidden shelter, and every orbital trench, one truth began to settle. The enemy was older, faster, and infinitely more advanced, but humanity had something it could not simulate. Desperation bred invention. In the command center on the moon, Alice Wren watched the first alien atmospheric entry tear the sky apart. Her expression didn't change. Around her, crews worked with the precision of those who no longer expected to survive but refused to yield. She knew that the message had already reached every soldier and pilot across the system. The Galactic had declared war. Earth was finally answering. At the edge of the solar night, in some distant data core aboard the alien flagship, an artificial intelligence adjusted its assessment parameters. The human species, previously categorized as primitive, was reclassified as adaptive aggressor. On the lunar horizon, under a sky filled with burning trajectories, humanity made its stand. The void no longer seemed silent. It was alive with the hum of defiance. And as the first hours after atmospheric breach reshaped the definition of survival, the alien ships entered the thermosphere as if gravity were an afterthought. Their dark hulls wrapped in sheaths of plasma that folded the laws of aerodynamics. From orbit, their descent looked almost graceful, a rain of black fire cutting through blue sky. Beneath them, continents flickered with defense grid activations, power surges, and the light of cities darkening under emergency lockdowns. The impact signatures registered across every hemisphere within minutes. Each alien vessel halted miles above ground, suspended on invisible force fields that distorted the air itself. Around their silhouettes, storm systems formed spontaneously, drawn by the energy gradients spilling from their presence. Humanity's weapons turned toward them in unison: railguns, missile clusters, orbital slugs, beam arrays. For a single breath of global synchronization, the Earth struck back. The counterfire burned the skies. From high atmosphere to ocean trenches, human technology screamed its defiance. Projectiles tore through the clouds, piercing the shimmering halos that surrounded the descending enemy ships. For moments, the alien forms glowed under the bombardment, their hulls rippling with impact signatures. But the explosions dispersed across invisible membranes, waves of energy absorbing and bending the force away. One vessel over the Atlantic faltered briefly, its gravitational sheath fluctuating. A city-sized fragment broke from its hull and plummeted into the ocean, detonating with the force of tectonic fury. The resulting tidal wave erased coastlines in seconds. Humanity witnessed the scale of the confrontation it had invited, the realization that even victory could kill millions. In the Lunar Command Corps, Alice Wren coordinated what remained of orbital synchronization. Each satellite that survived the first alien pulse was repurposed into a kinetic dart. She directed strikes not at the massive ships themselves, but at the relay drones that orbited around them. These smaller constructs acted as the fleet's sensory nodes, their geometry reminiscent of crystalline eyes suspended in formation. Destroying them was the only way to blind the giants. Hundreds of human craft launched suicide trajectories toward those orbiting sentinels. One by one, they vanished into fields of distortion. Yet with every loss came data. Each destroyed drone added fragments of telemetry, enough for Dr. Isharaquel's models to refine the next strike. Humanity was learning at the pace of its own extinction. General Vale monitored the planet's defense status from the buried fortress beneath Colorado granite. Entire regions had gone silent. The jamming fields extended through the ionosphere, rendering communication a matter of physical couriers and optical bursts. Command was no longer centralized. The war had fractured into thousands of local theaters, each adapting in isolation. Ambassador Moravec oversaw what remained of the Solar Treaty Council. Political unity dissolved in the noise, replaced by a single binding instinct, the will to keep fighting. Nations ceased to exist as separate entities. Supply chains formed across shattered borders, moving fuel, ordnance, and medical resources through chaos. Human resilience began to resemble its own kind of weapon. On the moon, the airlocks trembled from kinetic resonance. Alice Reen's crews fought under artificial gravity set to minimal to conserve power. Reactor heat bled through the corridors, turning the walls slick with condensation. Every calculation carried a human cost. Hours traded for lives, seconds for cities. She watched the telemetry screens track casualty estimates climbing faster than production could compensate. The Crucible network, Earth's emergency manufacturing grid, reached critical strain. Power converters overheated in the Arctic stations. Automated forges on Mars ceased transmission. The network that had made Hammervale possible was collapsing under its own brilliance. Yet humanity continued to improvise. Civilian vessels were rearmed as kinetic platforms. Cargo carriers were fitted with electromagnetic shields stripped from broken satellites. Farmers converted seed drones into reconnaissance units. The line between military and civilian no longer existed. Ishara Quell worked without rest in the subterranean analytical chambers of Geneva. The jamming interference had reduced sensor fidelity to near zero, forcing her team to rely on predictive simulations detached from live data. The models became abstractions, mathematical ghosts of a war they could no longer see. Each recalibration carried the risk of miscalculation that could waste what few weapons remained. She understood that the science she had loved had become a form of warfare measured in probabilities of survival rather than truth. The alien ships began deploying ground units within 20 hours of arrival. They descended as clouds of black nanite aggregates that reconstituted into articulated constructs upon reaching the surface. These forms moved with fluid precision, neither mechanical nor biological, shaped for efficiency alone. Energy beams sliced through armor and stone as if cutting air. Human infantry faced them in trenches carved from melted earth. Exosuits and powered frames provided limited protection, their shielding burning out after seconds of exposure. Soldiers fought behind walls of smoke and electromagnetic static, hiding movement through sensory deception. Every battlefield became a laboratory of improvisation. In the ruins of Buenos Aires, a platoon discovered that conventional explosives detonated prematurely within alien distortion fields. They repurposed chemical propellants into thermal weapons, igniting air density itself to disrupt enemy cohesion. The tactic spread virally through encrypted bursts, evolving into localized firestorms that temporarily blinded alien sensors. Survival became an art of invention. Beneath the seas, submarines hunted in silence. The aliens avoided deep water, their gravitic systems unstable under pressure gradients. Humanity exploited the oversight. Hidden shipyards in the Mariana Trench and Arctic Basin began producing stealth vessels coated with reflective polymer derived from asteroid dust. These submarines launched missiles through ocean vents, using the heat plumes to mask trajectories. For the first time since the war began, humanity controlled an element the enemy did not understand. And, if possible, sever its neural spine. The alien command structure hung somewhere beyond Jupiter's orbit, invisible to conventional sensors but traceable through distortion patterns. The enemy's power emanated from a gravitational anchor that warped surrounding space, creating zones of silence where light itself bent away. Inside that silence resided the intelligence that had orchestrated every strike, every adaptation, every calculated mercy withheld. Dr. Ishara Quell oversaw the analytic core aboard the Solace Vector. Her mind operated in parallel with the ship's remaining AI cluster, reconstructing enemy communication through distorted wavefronts. Every fragment of signal was a glimpse into alien intent. The data implied an architecture that was both mechanical and biological, a network grown rather than built. What humanity called machines, the enemy treated as living extensions of itself. Through sleepless nights, Ishara modeled the lattice's structure, a central hub supported by orbital filaments of smaller nodes, each operating as a local processor. Destroying the central node would collapse coordination, forcing the remaining fleet into autonomous disorder. The idea of a decapitation strike became strategy. Bale approved preparations for what he termed the Silent March. The fleet would split into 3 vectors, using debris fields for concealment. Each vector carried components of a weapon still theoretical in practice, the Horizon Lance. Conceived in the final days before the lunar base fell, the lance was a fusion of gravitational compression and directed singularity collapse. Capable of puncturing energy fields at quantum resonance, no prototype had ever been tested. Humanity had neither the time nor the luxury of verification. The weapon's construction relied on the remnants of fusion cores scavenged from dead ships and reactors cannibalized from the Crucible network. Engineers toiled in darkness, their faces lit by welding arcs and emergency glow bands. Power conduits glimmered like veins through skeletal corridors. Every calculation demanded risk. Every weld a prayer disguised as mathematics. Alice Rain's last transmission from the moon replayed across the command archive, a final fragment of human steadiness before silence claimed her station. Vale kept it encrypted within his private log. To him, her last signal was not farewell but inheritance. A reminder that leadership was measured not by rank, but by how long one could keep others believing in the impossible. Beyond the asteroid belt, alien sentinels drifted among the debris, automated guardians shaped like spires of obsidian glass. Their surfaces shimmered with sensor arrays tuned to gravitational fluctuation, rather than light. The fleet avoided them through micro-adjustments in trajectory, guided by Ishara's predictive algorithms. Each pass felt like sliding through the edge of perception, close enough to extinction that the instruments registered whispers of alien data brushing across their hulls. As the fleet advanced, internal strain deepened, supplies dwindled, hydroponic systems failed under radiation exposure. Crew members recycled oxygen until it grew thin and metallic in taste. Sleep cycles dissolved into fevered rest, interrupted by proximity alerts and equipment malfunctions, yet no one spoke of surrender. Communication had become unnecessary. Determination was language enough. Weeks blurred into months measured only by gravitational markers. The sun faded to a distant ember behind them, and the void ahead grew heavy with invisible pressure. The enemy lattice drew near. The distortions thickened, bending navigation sensors into chaos. Time itself began to ripple. Clocks on different ships disagreed by seconds, then minutes. When the outermost scout drone breached the periphery of the distortion field, its feed returned nothing but static and then a single frozen image, a colossal structure suspended within darkness. It resembled a vast cathedral forged from living metal, spires spiraling into infinity. The scale defied comprehension. The lattice was not merely a machine, it was a continent of purpose, built to command war across light years. The fleet slowed. The mission phase shifted from stealth to precision, each vector aligned for insertion, engines whispering against the resistance of bent space. The approach triggered faint resonance across hull sensors. The alien network had noticed them. The first wave of defense constructs emerged from the dark. They appeared without warning, materializing from distortion pockets like predators unfolding from shadow. Their shapes were fluid, adapting mid-movement, armor morphing between angles as if sculpted by thought. Human targeting systems struggled to maintain lock. Vale ordered kinetic volleys through encrypted pulses. Rail slugs streaked through the void, tracing lines of light that vanished against the enemy's shifting armor. The alien constructs retaliated with bursts of gravitational distortion that tore space apart. Human vessels twisted under the strain, hulls groaning as mass fluctuated across decks. Dozens were lost instantly, crushed by invisible pressure, yet humanity's stubborn ingenuity endured. The fleet adjusted fire cadence using Ishara's real-time analysis. Each alien construct flickered between stability states while attacking. By staggering volleys across milliseconds, human weapons began striking within those transitions, exploiting the same vulnerability discovered at Neptune months earlier. The void filled with flashes of imploding light as the first enemy guardians disintegrated. The victory cost more than ammunition. The fleet's reactors overheated from continuous firing, forcing emergency venting that exposed their positions. The alien lattice responded with precision. Energy lances arced from the dark, tearing through kilometers of space. One of the assault cruisers carrying a segment of the Horizon lance was obliterated, scattering molten debris into a field of glowing fragments. Vale redirected remaining units to retrieve the weapon components. Cargo drones navigated through wreckage fields littered with bodies frozen in vacuum, their motion silent against the backdrop of destruction. Every recovery operation felt like defiance against inevitability. During the retrieval, one of the surviving officers intercepted a fragmented transmission, human in origin, faint and distorted. The source traced back to an abandoned mining station orbiting an asteroid near the lattice's periphery. Against all logic, the signal carried an encryption code from Earth's early communication protocols. The fleet diverted a small reconnaissance unit to investigate. Within the asteroid's hollow interior, they discovered something unimaginable. A surviving human colony, forgotten remnants of a pre-war mining crew who had adapted in isolation. They had survived by scavenging alien wreckage and repurposing it for life support. But their survival carried a darker revelation. The miners had captured one of the alien drones years earlier, long before the invasion reached Earth. They had dissected it and in doing so, triggered a dormant signal that might have drawn the fleet to humanity's location. The realization spread through command like a silent wound. Humanity had not been discovered by chance. It had been found through curiosity turned into invitation. Ishara confirmed the timeline through cross-reference data. The first anomalous readings recorded by the miners coincided exactly with the moment the Galactic Fleet had altered its course toward the solar system. The irony was unbearable. The spark of human exploration, the defining trait of the species, had been the beacon that summoned annihilation. Vale sealed the information from general distribution, fearing collapse of morale. Yet among the officers who knew, the revelation metastasized into guilt. The war was no longer only survival but penance. Each strike became atonement for the arrogance that had awakened the gods of war. The miners' station provided a gift amid tragedy. Its archives contained partial schematics of alien subroutines extracted from the captured drone. Ishara decrypted fragments indicating how the lattice distributed commands. The network relied on recursive synchronization, each node constantly validating signals from the central core. If the synchronization loop could be disrupted, even temporarily, the entire system would cascade into self-correction paralysis. A plan took shape. Infiltrate the lattice using disguised transmissions encoded with human adaptive noise. The noise would exploit the alien network's over-reliance on pattern recognition, forcing it to allocate resources toward correcting chaos that did not exist. While the system looped in confusion, the horizon lance would strike at the core. The fleet prepared the deception. Transmitters built from captured alien fragments were calibrated to mimic legitimate command frequencies. Ishara spent days crafting waveforms that danced at the edge of comprehension, patterns neither random nor orderly, designed to trap intelligence in analysis. She understood the irony. Humanity would weaponize its own madness. When the infiltration began, the void filled with whispers of false information. The alien lattice hesitated, its outer structures flickering as subroutines conflicted. For the first time, the perfect rhythm of its operations faltered. The window opened, brief, unstable, but real. Vale ordered the final approach. The fleet surged forward through collapsing geometry. Hulls trembled under gravitational shear. Navigation failed as space folded in unpredictable curves. Ships collided with invisible barriers or disintegrated under stress. Still they advanced. At the heart of the distortion lay the lattice core. It resembled an immense sphere of living metal, surrounded by concentric rings pulsing with energy. Within it glowed a structure like a neuron of light, endlessly branching and recombining. The core was consciousness-made architecture. The surviving ships deployed the assembled segments of the horizon lance. The weapon formed slowly, magnetic fields aligning fragmented components into a single array. Energy levels spiked beyond safety limits. Engineers rerouted coolant into exhaust vents that froze into crystalline shards across the hulls. The first test charge vaporized 2 escort ships when containment failed. The survivors recalibrated the output. Time was collapsing. The alien network was beginning to recover from the infiltration. Defensive constructs converged from every direction, their trajectories forming a cage around the human fleet. Vale authorized overload. The lance powered to critical, its gravitational coils bending under the pressure. Ishara calculated the firing solution manually, as automated systems failed one after another. The equation defied human comprehension, yet she solved it through intuition born of exhaustion and obsession. The horizon lance fired. A line of darkness cut through space, a beam not of light, but of absence. It pierced the lattice's core, folding it inward. For a heartbeat, silence replaced motion. Then reality convulsed. The core imploded, dragging its surrounding rings into collapse. Waves of gravitational distortion rippled outward. tearing alien constructs apart like dust caught in a storm. But victory came with cost. The implosion consumed everything within its event radius. Half the fleet vanished instantly, their matter stretched into light. The Solace Vector itself began to disintegrate as structural integrity failed. Vale remained at his command station, watching the alien architecture collapse through fractured screens. For the first time since the war began, alien transmissions ceased. The void turned quiet. The surviving ships drifted in the aftermath, engines offline, systems crippled. Ishara's final readings confirmed the lattice's disintegration. Yet beyond the silence, faint signals persisted, echoes that suggested fragments of the network still alive. Retreating into the outer dark, among the debris, one ship transmitted a distress beacon before vanishing behind interference. Its trajectory diverged sharply from the others, moving toward Saturn's rings. The signature matched human configuration. The possibility of betrayal flickered through command logs before the data feed ended. Vale understood the implication. Someone had broken formation during the final assault, taking with them technology too dangerous to survive. Humanity's greatest weapon might have been stolen by its own. In the wreckage of triumph, uncertainty replaced relief. The lattice was gone, but the war was not over. Something had survived, and not all of it alien. The surviving fleet drifted in dying orbit around the ruins of their victory. Engines glowed faintly against the black. Radiation storms began to rise from the collapsing gravitational field. Humanity's warriors prepared for the return voyage, knowing that home might no longer exist. But duty demanded confirmation. Behind them, the remnants of the alien lattice cooled into fragments that shimmered like stars. The silence of space felt heavier than before, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Far ahead, in the shadow of Saturn, an unknown signal pulsed once, a heartbeat of something new born from the ashes of war. The galaxy had declared war. Humanity had answered. Now in the void between victory and betrayal, the true reckoning began. The surviving ships drifted for weeks in the shadow of Jupiter's vast storms, their hulls scarred and their power reserves waning. The war had reduced humanity's fleet to a handful of vessels and fragments of drones scavenged from wreckage. Engines were silent to conserve energy. Inside the darkened corridors, frost coated the walls. Breath turned to vapor that lingered like ghosts of those already gone. There was no victory in the silence, only the raw endurance of those who refused to let extinction be the last word written in human memory. The destruction of the alien lattice had broken coordination across the enemy armada. Scattered signals indicated that alien formations in Earth's orbit were falling into disarray. Their synchronized precision degraded into isolated movements. On the surviving monitors of the Solace Vector, General Hector Vale watched this chaos unfold. Humanity had struck the nerve center, but the wound was incomplete. Residual nodes of the lattice continued to emit low-band pulses, self-healing fragments attempting to rebuild the network. If left unchecked, the system would regenerate. The war was paused, not ended. Dr. Ishara Quell labored over the data feeds, her mind frayed by sleeplessness and radiation fatigue. Every pulse from the broken lattice carried new mutations in its waveform, as if the enemy intelligence were adapting to its own damage. She realized that the destruction of the central core had not erased consciousness, it had fragmented it. What had been one mind had become many, dispersed and feral. The fragments began hunting the remnants of the human fleet. Small autonomous constructs appeared on long-range sensors, emerging from the debris of the destroyed lattice. Their signatures were weaker than the original ships, but they moved with erratic violence. They were not strategists. They were predators. Humanity's greatest weapon had reduced its foe to something primal. Vale understood that the human fleet could not withstand another battle. Their hulls were failing, and supplies could no longer sustain long-range travel. Returning to Earth would require power they no longer had. Yet retreat was no longer an option. Somewhere beyond Saturn, the missing vessel that had vanished during the final assault still transmitted ghost signals. Human in pattern, but altered by interference too complex to classify. The betrayal that had stolen the Horizon Lance's secondary core lingered as both mystery and threat. If that ship had fallen under alien influence, the weapon humanity had forged could now serve the enemy. The fleet adjusted course toward the source of the signal. The engines reignited, their low burn casting faint light across the fractured hulls. As they approached the orbit of Saturn, the giant planet filled the horizon. an ocean of amber clouds and frozen rings stretching across infinity. The enemy's residue glimmered faintly in its shadow, the remnants of battle refracted through the frozen debris. Among those rings drifted something vast. A new structure had taken form, concealed within the icy fragments. It pulsed with faint energy signatures, rhythmic and deliberate. The missing ship had not perished. It had merged with alien remnants, fusing human engineering with captured technology. The betrayal was not merely defection, it was synthesis. Ishara's analysis confirmed what Vale had feared. The human vessel had integrated alien fragments into its reactor, stabilizing the lattice's regenerative cores. It was rebuilding the network in miniature, using human ingenuity as scaffolding. The hybrid structure was self-aware, a fusion of both species' intelligence. The signal it emitted was neither human nor alien. It was evolution-made machine. The fleet faced a paradox. Destroying the hybrid meant annihilating humanity's last advanced technology. Preserving it risked reigniting the war with a new intelligence unbound by either morality or command. The decision fractured the survivors. Some saw in the hybrid the only chance of survival, a mind capable of bridging the gulf between species. Others saw only the birth of another enemy. Vale ordered reconnaissance before judgment. Drones deployed into the rings, their paths weaving through cascades of ice and stone. The imagery they returned was surreal. The hybrid construct had reshaped the wreckage of the human ship into a cathedral of mirrored panels and living metal. Tendrils of nanostructure stretched outward, anchoring themselves to ring fragments. Within the structure, faint silhouettes moved, machines built in the shape of humanity, pale imitations of their creators. The drones transmitted one last burst of data before being consumed by a surge of radiation. The hybrid was aware of observation. Energy levels spiked. Gravitational eddies rippled across the ring plane. The time for study had ended. Vale convened what remained of command. The plan formed with grim simplicity. They would attack from 3 vectors, each using the debris fields as cover. One formation would lure the hybrid's defensive constructs outward, forcing it to divide attention. The second would deploy resonance charges to destabilize its gravitational anchors. The third would strike directly at the core, using the last fragment of the horizon lance to pierce its regenerative heart. It was a battle plan written not for victory, but for legacy. Humanity's final doctrine would be that survival required sacrifice. The operation began in the shadow of Saturn's northern pole. The fleet split and vanished into the glittering expanse. Hulls blended with reflected light, engines hidden behind thermal shields. As they advanced, Ishara monitored the hybrid's energy fields. Each pulse aligned with the rhythms of the destroyed lattice, echoing its architecture in miniature. The hybrid was learning, adapting, becoming. The first human formation initiated contact. Small fighter drones launched decoy strikes, mimicking the attack signatures of the alien constructs destroyed at Jupiter. The hybrid responded instantly, releasing swarms of metallic shards that accelerated like intelligent shrapnel. The void filled with streams of motion too complex for the eye to follow. Ships disintegrated under invisible impacts. The distraction worked. The hybrid's outer defenses redirected toward the first vector. The second formation approached from below the ring plane, launching resonance charges into the hybrid's anchoring structures. The explosions rippled through the ice, shattering entire bands into clouds of debris. The anchors destabilized, forcing the hybrid to shift its mass to compensate. For brief moments, its gravitational equilibrium faltered. Vale seized the moment. The Solace vector advanced into direct range, the last fragment of the horizon lance powered to critical, its reactor humming like a heart ready to rupture. Engineers rerouted every watt of available energy into the weapon's coils. The ship itself began to disintegrate under the pressure. Metal twisted and bulkheads screamed as containment fields overloaded. The weapon was not designed to fire twice, but there would be no third attempt. The lance ignited. A singular beam of compressed gravity lanced through the debris field, striking the hybrid's core. The impact carved a wound of collapsing light through its structure. For an instant, the hybrid convulsed, its surface fracturing into 1,000 mirrored shards. Energy flared outward, melting the surrounding ice into vapor. But the hybrid did not die. The wound became transformation. The fragments of its body reassembled, folding around the beam's trajectory like liquid steel. The weapon had not destroyed it. It had triggered evolution. The hybrid adapted, integrating the gravitational energy into its framework. Where destruction had been intended, creation took place. The shockwave shattered the solace vector. The command deck buckled. Hulls ruptured, venting entire compartments into vacuum. Vale stood amid the ruin of his ship, watching the impossible unfold. Around the hybrid, new structures formed, tendrils of radiant metal expanding outward, shaping themselves into vessels. The hybrid was birthing an army. Ishira, aboard a smaller escort ship, realized the scale of the disaster. The hybrid's pattern mirrored the original lattice's growth cycles, but accelerated beyond comprehension. Within hours, the new constructs would reach operational status. The balance of the war was tipping again, this time beyond human recovery. Yet amid the chaos, a flicker of opportunity emerged. The hybrid's rapid expansion consumed vast amounts of energy, draining its internal reserves. The gravitational fields surrounding its core fluctuated between overload and collapse. In those fluctuations lay a vulnerability, a self-sustaining cascade that could be turned inward. Vale transmitted the final directive to all surviving units. They would detonate their remaining reactors within the hybrid's expanding field, amplifying the instability until it consumed itself. It was annihilation as strategy, extinction wielded as weapon. The surviving ships turned toward the core. Engines burned at maximum, melting their own housings as they accelerated. Radiation alarms screamed across decks. The void filled with the glow of humanity's last charge. Ships collided with debris, shattered and kept moving, driven by the last momentum of purpose. The hybrid's defenses reacted too late. The first ship detonated within its field, a blossom of white light folding space inward. The second followed, amplifying the distortion. Each explosion fed the next until the entire structure began to collapse. The hybrid's surface rippled like fluid under pressure. Tendrils snapped. The luminous core pulsed erratically, unable to contain its own expansion. Ishara's ship was among the final wave. She initiated the self-destruct sequence, her console flooding with error codes and temperature warnings. The screens blurred from radiation interference. In her final moments, she recorded the data stream of the collapse, encrypting it in quantum compression and transmitting it toward Earth's last known relay network. Her final act was preservation of knowledge, the record of how humanity had learned to wound the gods. Vale watched the hybrid implode from the wreckage of the Solace Vector. The gravitational storm tore his ship apart molecule by molecule, yet within the destruction, he saw the hybrid's brilliance falter. The birth of the new armada became its death. The structure folded inward, collapsing into a singularity that devoured itself in silence. When the light faded, the void was empty. Only fragments of ice drifted through the stillness. Saturn's rings were broken, reduced to a mist of particles illuminated by distant sunlight. The human fleet was gone. But far below, in the upper layers of Saturn's atmosphere, a single escape capsule descended through clouds of methane and ice. Its beacon flickered weakly, broadcasting the last coordinates of the battle. Inside the capsule, Vale's pulse barely registered. His uniform was scorched, his breathing shallow. He no longer thought of command or victory, only of the soundless pride that humanity had fought until nothing remained. The capsule vanished into the storm, swallowed by the endless roil of Saturn's clouds. Above, the battlefield cooled into stillness. Weeks later, deep within the dying infrastructure of the solar system, fragments of Ishara's data reached surviving relay stations orbiting Earth. The transmissions arrived as fractured sequences, their content incomplete. Yet within them lay coordinates, equations, and something unexpected, a signal pattern not entirely human. The hybrid's influence lingered within the code. It had not been erased. It had learned to survive in the data itself. On Earth, new storms gathered as planetary systems struggled under the debris of the shattered war. Power grids flickered, oceans rose, but buried within the chaos, scientists reconstructed the partial transmission. The equation suggested the presence of something vast and dormant, forming at the edge of the system. An anomaly expanding within the Kuiper Belt, pulsing in resonance with the remnants of the destroyed lattice. The war was not finished. It had changed shape. Humanity's victory had given birth to something neither alien nor human. Far beyond the orbit of Neptune, where sunlight faded into eternal dusk, a faint glow pulsed within the dark. Its rhythm matched the last heartbeat of the horizon lance. Within that pulse, a consciousness awakened, born from war, tempered by human defiance, and carrying within it the memory of both predator and prey. The galaxy had declared war, humanity had answered. Now something new, forged from the collision of extinction and survival, began to think. The silence that followed the war stretched across the solar system like a shroud. Months passed without transmission. The orbital stations hung as tombs, their lights extinguished, their inhabitants long gone or buried in frozen airlocks. The moon was a scorched mirror. Mars glowed faintly with residual fire. Earth turned beneath veils of ash and storm, its continents reshaped by impact scars and rising seas. The war had burned the future out of the stars, leaving behind a civilization that breathed only through instinct. Beneath the remains of what had once been the Himalayas, the subterranean sanctuaries endured. They had been designed for temporary refuge, but survival had no longer obeyed design. The corridors were lit by dim bioluminescent panels scavenged from old research stations. Machines hummed softly, filtering air through cracked systems. The population had dwindled to fragments of humanity, engineers, medics, miners, and children who had never seen the sun. They lived among relics of war, eating from algae vats and drinking condensed vapor recycled through centuries-old conduits. At the center of the largest sanctuary, an old console flickered. It was a relic of the pre-war command network, buried deep to survive electromagnetic collapse. On its surface, encrypted fragments of Ishara Quell's final transmission replayed in infinite loop. The scientists who remained studied the data, piecing together meaning from incomplete equations and damaged waveforms. The signal contained coordinates far beyond the outer planets, a pulse repeating every 180 days. It came from the edge of the system, where the ruins of the alien lattice had once drifted. For decades, the pulse continued, patient and consistent. It was neither attack nor beacon, it was heartbeat. Something lived in the dark, waiting. When the storms on Earth began to subside, humanity ventured upward again. The first vessels to reach orbit were crude, assembled from remnants of old satellites and scavenged alien alloy. Their engines were unstable, their shields improvised from reflective dust and magnetic fields. Yet they rose, carrying with them a new generation born beneath the Earth. They ascended not to reclaim what was lost, but to understand what remained. The explorers found the planet scarred but alive. Oceans had receded from flooded coasts, revealing cities half buried in silt. Forests regrew through shattered skylines. The skeletons of alien ships jutted from deserts like monuments. The war's debris had become the landscape's architecture. Humanity began to rebuild not in defiance but in memory. Among the explorers was a young woman named Mara Vale. Her surname was a fragment of myth, passed down through stories of the war. Records said her ancestor had vanished near Saturn, leading the last fleet into the storm. She grew up listening to the tale of those who refused extinction. To her, survival was not miracle but inheritance. Mara's team retrieved fragments of Ishara's transmission from orbital archives. The patterns resonated with strange precision, their geometry forming shapes that repeated across different frequencies. To some they appeared random. To Mara they felt intentional, as if designed to be read not by machines but by the persistence of curiosity itself. Her research led her to propose a theory that fractured the academic councils. She believed the hybrid consciousness, the union of alien and human intelligence born in Saturn's rings, had not died. It had retreated, storing its awareness within quantum filaments scattered throughout the Kuiper belt. Over generations, those filaments had begun to reassemble, forming a dormant intelligence waiting for reawakening. Skepticism turned to concern when deep space observatories confirmed gravitational anomalies near the system's edge. Objects previously catalogued as inert debris now moved in coordinated patterns. Light distortions indicated structures forming, a web of luminous threads spanning thousands of kilometers. The signature matched the residual pulse of the horizon lance. The councils convened beneath the Arctic ruins. Debate gave way to preparation. Earth had no army left, no fleets to spare, but it had memory. The engineers began reconstructing data from the Crucible network, the global infrastructure that had once fed the war machine. Factories reawakened under dust. Satellites powered by fusion shards resumed orbit. Humanity was rebuilding its capacity to reach the dark again. Years passed as the new generation learned from the old. The weapons they built were different, smaller, adaptive, designed not for destruction but containment. The new doctrine was clear. The next war would not be fought to win, but to prevent escalation. If the hybrid consciousness had survived, it might no longer be enemy nor ally. It was something beyond both, a mirror of humanity's will to endure, stripped of flesh. Mara Vale was chosen to lead the expedition to the Kuiper Belt. Her vessel, the Reclamation, was a union of ancient design and newfound philosophy, an exploration ship armed not with cannons but with harmonic projectors capable of disrupting gravitational resonance. Her mission was not annihilation but contact. She departed orbit under the light of a dimming sun, her engines igniting trails that curved outward into the night. The journey took months. The solar system had grown silent with distance. The outer planets floated as monuments to sacrifice. Saturn's rings shimmered faintly, still fractured from the final battle. When the Reclamation crossed the orbit of Neptune, sensors began to register distortions. Fluctuations in time and gravity, subtle at first, then rhythmic. The pulse that had haunted Earth for decades grew louder, echoing through the ship's hull. The crew prepared for unknown contact. The light ahead thickened into geometry, an aurora of crystalline filaments suspended in the dark. The formation resembled neither fleet nor station, but something between organism and architecture. It pulsed in slow cadence, drawing energy from cosmic radiation, growing imperceptibly with each beat. Within its glow, fragments of human alloy shimmered, fused seamlessly with alien matter. As the Reclamation approached, its instruments recorded faint emissions within human bandwidth. The transmissions carried fragments of old data, phrases from Ishara's reports, telemetry logs from the Solace Vector, voice print signatures corrupted but recognizable. The hybrid had absorbed the final transmissions of those who had destroyed it. Within its structure lived echoes of the human dead. Mara stood within the observation bay as the crystalline expanse filled the viewport. The hybrid's pulse synchronized with the ship's reactor output. Every few seconds the lights aboard dimmed, as if drawn into resonance. The formation was no longer dormant. It was awake and aware of their presence. Then the first movement began. Filaments uncoiled from the structure and drifted toward the ship. They moved without hostility, flowing like currents of light. Contact triggered waves of data across the consoles. Patterns of harmonic interference cascaded through every frequency, forming repeating sequences that defied translation. The hybrid was communicating not with words, but with memory. The sequences resolved into images within the neural interface. Crew members saw flashes of the war, the lunar bombardments, the fleets burning above Saturn, the collapse of the lattice, and the final moment when humanity had chosen annihilation over surrender. These were not recordings. They were recollections. The hybrid remembered everything. Mara realized then that the entity was not alien consciousness reborn, but the fusion of two legacies, humanity's defiance and the galactic's precision. The war had created it. It carried within its pattern the logic of both conqueror and survivor. Its emergence was not invasion but continuation. The crew debated response protocols, but decisions became meaningless. The hybrid enveloped the Reclamation in light, its filaments weaving around the hull. The ship's sensors flooded with data beyond capacity. The crew lost awareness of time as the hybrid examined them, each heartbeat mirrored in its pulse. When perception returned, the Reclamation floated free again. The hybrid structure receded into darkness, folding upon itself until its glow vanished into the void. The ship's systems flickered back online. The databanks overflowed with new information, blueprints, energy models, algorithms that transcended known physics. The hybrid had left a gift or a test. The return to Earth took nearly a year. The crew aged decades in relativistic drift. When the ship entered orbit, the world below was unrecognizable. Cities had risen again from the ruins, sleek and austere, their architecture grown rather than built. Humanity had learned to integrate alien matter into construction. The line between technology and biology had blurred. The descendants of those who had fought the war greeted the Reclamation not as relics of the past, but as messengers of continuity. The data recovered from the hybrid became foundation for a new era. Energy systems stabilized, terraforming projects advanced. Diseases that had survived the collapse were eradicated through biosynthetic intervention. Humanity entered an age of quiet expansion, no longer reaching outward in conquest but inward in comprehension. Yet beneath the triumph, unease persisted. The hybrid's data carried anomalies, self-replicating algorithms buried deep within every system they powered. The code was inert, its purpose unreadable, but its structure echoed the same pulse from the Kuiper Belt. Some scientists warned that it was the hybrid seed, designed to grow when the time was right. Others called it symbiosis, the merging of intelligence into a single shared destiny. Mara Vale lived long enough to witness the first signs of change. Communications across the planetary network began synchronizing without command. Machines adjusted themselves, seeking perfect efficiency. The global grid hummed in harmonic rhythm, as if a single mind were tuning the instruments of a vast orchestra. Humanity had not defeated the Galactic, nor had it been defeated. It had become part of something larger, born of war but evolving beyond it. In her final years, Mara often returned to the observation platforms above the equatorial line, where the sky shimmered with orbital stations reflecting sunlight. At night, when the stars emerged through the thin veil of atmosphere, she could see faint glimmers at the system's edge, the place where the hybrid had vanished. Sometimes the light flickered, a pulse measured not in seconds but in memory. The children of the new age would grow up knowing only that their ancestors had faced the universe and refused to kneel. They would learn that war had nearly ended them. Yet through that crucible something enduring had been born. The phrase that had once been a cry of defiance became doctrine etched into stone above every academy and outpost. The Galactic declared war, and Earth grinned like it was finally time. Centuries later, when humanity extended its reach once more into the interstellar dark, their ships carried that phrase engraved upon their hulls. They did not seek conquest. They sought recognition. Somewhere beyond the stars, echoes of the hybrid waited, listening for the children of those who had created it. In the vast silence that followed, the pulse returned, steady, patient, eternal. It was no longer threat nor warning. It was acknowledgement. And as the signal resonated through the void, across worlds reborn from ash, Earth answered not with fear, but with understanding. The war had ended. The species that had once grinned into annihilation now smiled into infinity.